Okay, so today's discussion will be about the Zoot riots. And the Zoot riot basically was a clashing between servicemen and Mexican Americans. I would say there's four main bullet points and I would say the four main roots of why the violence itself stirred up. And I would say number one, racism. Racism has been in America for as long as we can remember, and it's still here. And in this case, whites thought they were superior than Mexican Americans, and Mexican Americans did not agree on that. So that kind of led tension to happen. Number two, the Mexican Revolution was happening at the time. So as Mexican Americans were fleeing the Mexican Revolution, they went to Los Angeles, along with Midwesterners who were kind of migrating to Los Angeles. And as that was happening, the population of Los Angeles kind of turned over, and now it was like Mexican American had the majority population. And I guess the white community thought of that as a threat. And that just grew more hateful for them. And then we have the 1942 Sleep Lagoon trial. And the Sleep Lagoon trial, not to go into much detail, is the murder of Jose Diaz. And a little detail was Jose Diaz was like jumped supposedly the night before, and locals found him, called for help, and he was escorted to the hospital where he died. And trust me, the killing of Mexican Americans never really caught the eye of the public, but for some reason Jose Diaz's case was different, and they convicted over 600 Hispanics. And I mean, if you were between the ages 12 and 25, you had most likely been picked up. And civil rights were not put into this case because Mexicans were brutally beat. Brutally. Unconsciously. They would beat you until they heard the information they wanted to hear. If not, you would get beat. And I mean, as they were into the judge room, they weren't even allowed to sit with their lawyer. And I mean, the main point, is to sit with your lawyer and discuss information they have. But I guess I was not given. And then my last one is the media. The media now today has a great influence on us, and it did back then as well. The media, instead of keeping you up to date on the war that was happening, which is World War II, that was happening overseas at the time, they would keep you up to date to like Mexican American problems, the Hispanic problems, or the African American problems, and they would just target them, like showing how they only evolved. They were just saying like Hispanics and African Americans are just criminals. They're no good for nothing. They're just gang rivalries and all this, and they're just nothing. And I mean, as servicemen kind of entered back into the United States, it would just be like, oh, these Mexican Americans are no good. Oh, what hate. Oh, what prejudice I have towards them. And that just kind of grew up with more of the tension. Okay, so you would say, oh, so what kind of, when did the violence kind of start? And the violence started on May 31st. And the story to that was, servicemen were walking back to their base, and they saw on the other side Mexican American women. And so they thought, oh, let me go hit it. And I mean, as they were going to approach the Mexican American woman, there was a Mexican American men. And I mean, servicemen being rid of them, they kind of felt threatened. So I mean, at one point as they were walking, one of them, the serviceman named Daisy Coleman, he grabbed the arm of a Mexican American and kind of twisted it. And as human beings do react, Mexican Americans just kind of attacked on them. And I mean, the beating of the serviceman was so tremendous that not only did Daisy Coleman like break his jaw and everything, but the servicemen with him had to kind of surrender and retreat. And then, as that was happening, the servicemen were like, we need to get our revenge. We need to. So then, that June 1st throughout June 2nd was basically the revenge of that incident. And it wasn't even the Mexican Americans' fault, really, seeing the context. But yeah, and the violence at one point it was like 5,000 servicemen against all these Mexican Americans, and they would come as far as Las Vegas just to come to fight with this, and they would use chains, pipes, anything they could find to beat Mexican Americans. And I mean, Mexican Americans grew smarter, because I mean they would hide and then attack them. But yeah, and the riot itself ended after, officials like, oh no, Los Angeles is off limits to every serviceman. So servicemen can no longer enter. And I mean, I kind of forgot to tell you of key concepts. Mexican Americans were Zoot rights, and that kind of distinguished them from the rest of the Americans, because it was just a basic trend between them. It was not the dominant trend in America. And servicemen would kind of pick them out by that and be like, oh, let's be the one in Zoot suit. Because only Mexican and other people of color wear Zoot suits. And I mean, as that was happening, they kind of banned Zoot suits. And if you were seen wearing a Zoot suit, you would put into jail for like 2 days, I think. Yeah. And then people would go as far as getting committees of people to understand of why. Well, the mayor of Los Angeles got a committee of people who kind of, put into research of why the thing happened. And I mean, people would, the basic number one reason was racial tension between them. And then, very few had to respond of the riot, and Eleanor Roosevelt herself said it was a racial tension that kind of caused it. And I mean, she kind of brings pity to the Mexican American for going through such a thing. And then other people like Robert, I forget his name, but he would say the Nazis are here. The Nazis are the ones giving ideas to the Mexican Americans to attack. The Nazis are in them, and they're just here to overcome the United States and stuff by starting war with ourselves so we could be weaker overseas and stuff like that. And I mean, he would continue babbling about such things. But then, at the point where he's like, we need to see evidence and stuff, he would just be quiet. Like, that idea kind of went downhill afterwards. And I mean, people would say, no, it's not racial tension, it's just like the delinquents and stuff like that. But then again, that was never proven. And that was kind of the major outline of the Zoot riots.